The bells of Wessex rang across the cold morning air, echoing over the stone towers and the frost-covered fields beyond. From the highest balcony of the fortress, Duke Thomas Arden watched the valley awaken, plumes of smoke rising from village chimneys, the glimmer of the Avon winding like silver beneath a pale sun. He was a man carved by duty, tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes the colour of storm clouds and a silence that unnerved even his council. That morning, parchment scrolls were carried through the castle halls, the royal proclamation sealed in red wax. 50 noble daughters chosen from across the realm were to gather in Wessex within a fortnight. From among them, Thomas must choose his bride, a union to strengthen alliances, secure the borders, and continue the Alpha bloodline that had ruled for centuries. The hall erupted in murmurs as the herald read the decree aloud. The Duke shall select a lady of virtue, wisdom, and noble birth, that the line of Arden may endure in honour and strength. Thomas's jaw tightened. Virtue and nobility, words that had long since lost their meaning. He had seen the vanity in the courts, the hunger behind painted smiles, and the lies spun in silken whispers. Love, to him, had always been a myth reserved for songs sung by drunk poets near the hearth. Yet beneath his armour of indifference, something restless stirred. Before we dive deeper into this tale of forbidden love and rebellion of the heart, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that stir the soul, stories where courage and passion defy the chains of expectation. The Duke turned from the balcony as his steward, Lord Henrik, entered with cautious respect. "The invitations have been dispatched, Your Grace. The nobility is in a frenzy. And they say the Duke of Wessex shall soon take his Alpha's crown beside a lady worthy of his blood." Thomas's voice was calm, but edged with fatigue. "They mistake obedience for worth, Henrik. Tell me, what worth lies in ambition clothed as devotion?" Henrik hesitated. "It is not for me to judge, my lord, but the realm expects—" "The realm expects a show," Thomas interrupted. "And I have worn their crown long enough to know what pleases them, but perhaps this time the crown will not please me." The steward bowed, retreating without another word. Thomas lingered in the hall, where banners bearing the silver wolf sigil hung heavy in the dim light. His ancestors' portraits stared down from the walls, faces proud and stern, each man bound by duty, each woman chosen not for love, but for lineage. He felt their judgment like cold fingers on his neck. Later that afternoon, he descended from the castle on horseback, unaccompanied, his cloak trailing over the mud-slick road that wound toward the village. The air carried the scent of rain and fresh bread. He followed it through the market square, past stalls of barley, wool, and fish, until he reached the small bakery at the corner of Mill Street, a modest building with ivy climbing its walls and smoke curling softly from its chimney. Inside, laughter and the sound of kneading filled the space. Flour dust danced in the sunlight, and a girl's voice, low, melodic, unguarded, hummed a tune he didn't recognize. Thomas stood by the doorway, watching as she shaped the dough with quick, deft hands. She was not striking by courtly standards, but there was a liveliness in her movements, a quiet grace that drew his gaze. Ilara Whitby. He remembered her name vaguely from the village ledgers, the baker's daughter. When she finally noticed him, her eyes widened, startled but unafraid. "My lord," she said, brushing flour from her fingers, "we don't often see nobles down here. Lost your way, perhaps?" Thomas's lips curved slightly. "Perhaps I have." Her smile returned, small but genuine. "Then you'll want bread, not titles. We trade in hunger here, not ambition." He looked at her for a moment longer, something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. "Then I'll take a loaf, and a lesson if you're willing to teach one." Ilara laughed, the sound bright against the grey of the day. "Lessons aren't free, my lord. But I'll add it to your debt." As he left with warm bread in hand, Thomas felt the weight of his crown shift, not on his brow, but within. For the first time, he wondered if the whispers of change might not come from the throne, but from the hands of a baker's daughter dusted in flour and courage. Morning crept through the narrow streets of Wessex village, gilding the rooftops with a shy gold. The smell of bread drifted from the small bakery on Mill Street long before the church bells tolled for dawn. Inside, Ilara Whitby had already been awake for hours, sleeves rolled high, arms dusted in flour like a craftsman cloaked in snow. The warmth of the ovens glowed against her cheeks, and the rhythm of her work filled the quiet space. Knead, fold, breathe. Her father, Edmund Whitby, watched her from the counter, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. "You work harder than any knight, girl," he said, his voice roughened by years of labor. "One day you'll forget to eat your own bread." Ilara smiled faintly. "If I stop to eat, father, who will keep the ovens alive? Bread doesn't wait for kings or dawn." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You talk like your mother, always turning chores into poetry." Ilara's heart softened at the memory. Her mother had died 5 winters ago, leaving behind the bakery, and a legacy of kindness that the villagers still whispered about. To Ilara, every loaf baked was a quiet tribute to her. The door creaked open, and the morning light spilled across the counter. "Old Mrs. Thatcher entered with her usual complaint. "You charge too little, Ilara. Folk will take advantage." "I charge what fills the belly," Ilara replied gently. "That's enough." "Bah!" the old woman huffed, though her eyes softened. "You'll never grow rich with that heart of yours." Ilara only smiled and handed her a warm loaf. "I'd rather grow full than rich, Mrs. Thatcher." As the morning crowd thickened, chatter filled the bakery, merchants gossiping about the Duke's latest decree. 50 noble daughters," one said. "Can you imagine? Each one prettier and prouder than the last." "They'll claw each other to ribbons before it's done," another replied. "The Alpha Crown brings out the wolf in every woman." Ilara rolled her eyes, shaping another loaf. "Let them have their ribbons and claws," she murmured under her breath. "We've better things to do than fight for a man who doesn't even know we exist." "Careful," her friend Alice teased from the corner, dusting pastry trays. "If the Duke heard you say that, he'd have you scrubbing the castle floors." "I doubt he listens to anyone who smells of bread," Ilara said lightly, though her words carried an edge of truth. To her, nobles lived in another world, one where hunger and humility were strangers. Yet as the day wore on, a strange restlessness filled her chest. She caught herself glancing toward the road leading up to the fortress, half expecting to see the tall figure from the day before. She dismissed the thought quickly, scolding her imagination. Nobles did not return to the same bakery twice, and certainly not for the company of a baker's daughter. Still, the image lingered. The Duke's grey eyes, the quiet way he'd spoken, the hint of something unguarded beneath his composure. She shook her head, laughing softly at herself. Dreams are for poets, Ilara, not bakers. When the evening came, and the ovens finally cooled, she stepped outside to breathe. The air was sweet with the scent of rain. Across the village square, children chased one another with sticks, their laughter rising like sparks. Life, simple and small, unfolded around her, and she found comfort in its rhythm. Then, from the distance, came the faint echo of hooves, steady, deliberate. Alice leaned out from the doorway. "You hear that?" Ilara frowned. Probably a messenger from the castle. But when the rider passed, she caught a glimpse of the same black stallion she had seen the previous day. The Duke did not slow, yet, as he rode by, their eyes met, a brief, startling moment that left her heart stumbling like a dropped loaf. Alice gasped softly. "Was that—" "Yes," Ilara whispered, her voice barely audible. "It was." She turned back to the bakery, her pulse unsteady. "And if he keeps looking this way," she murmured to herself, "trouble will find us both." She closed the door behind her, unaware that beyond the hills the nobles' carriages had already begun to arrive, and the world she knew was about to change forever. The castle of Wessex had never seen such splendor, nor such tension. For days carriages rumbled through the gates, crested banners fluttering above them, each bearing the emblem of a noble house. Courtiers whispered names as if reciting a litany, daughters of dukes, counts, and barons, each more ambitious than the last. Silk rustled like the wings of restless birds, jewels gleamed beneath the grey English sky, and the air buzzed with perfume and pride. From his chamber window, Duke Thomas Arden watched the arrivals in silence. The fortress courtyard looked more like a parade ground than a home. The council's advisors scurried about, recording titles and lineages, while musicians played in vain attempts to lighten the mood. His steward, Lord Henrik, entered, bowing slightly. "Your Grace, the ladies have gathered for the first supper." "It would please the council if you address them before the feast begins." Thomas did not turn from the window. "And what would you have me say, Henrik? That one among them shall soon bear the crown, though I have yet to look upon her heart." Henrik sighed softly. "The council hopes for reassurance, my lord. They believe the Duke of Wessex will choose wisely." Thomas's gaze drifted toward the village road, barely visible between the hills. "Wisely," he repeated, "a word the council wields like a sword. But wisdom does not always rest in nobility." The steward hesitated. "You still think of the girl?" Thomas's eyes hardened slightly, though not in anger. "I think of bread, Henrik. And the taste of honesty that came with it." Henrik bowed again, his silence serving as answer enough. When evening descended, the great hall glowed with firelight and gold. 50 women sat at long tables, their laughter carefully measured, their smiles rehearsed. The Duke entered with his advisers, and a hush rippled through the crowd. Every eye turned toward him. A predator, they thought, but one who might yet be tamed. Thomas raised his goblet, speaking with calm authority. "Daughters of noble houses, welcome to Wessex. You have travelled far to stand in service of the crown and the peace of our realm. I honour your courage and grace." He paused, his tone sharpening. "But know this, I seek not only beauty or title. The crown I wear weighs heavier than gold. I would share it only with one whose heart does not crave it." The silence that followed was uncomfortable, almost defiant. A few smiled politely, others exchanged wary glances. Lady Rosalind of Kent, renowned for her charm, rose gracefully. "Your Grace, if humility is your desire, then surely you will find it among us, for who stands here without devotion to the crown?" The words were sweet, but the tone was sharpened with challenge. Thomas met her gaze evenly. "Devotion can be a performance, my lady. I seek something that does not tremble when unobserved." Her lips curved faintly, though her eyes cooled. "Then you seek a ghost, Your Grace." The musicians resumed, soft strings filling the tension between them. The feast continued, but Thomas's thoughts drifted. He saw gestures without sincerity, laughter without warmth. He imagined flower dust instead of pearls, honest work instead of rehearsed grace. At the far end of the hall, Lord Henrik watched him closely, then leaned toward another adviser. "He is distracted," the man murmured. "Too quiet. His mind is not on the contest." "Then perhaps it is elsewhere," Henrik replied, his expression unreadable. After the feast, as torches dimmed and nobles retired to their chambers, Thomas walked alone through the corridors. He felt caged within the very walls meant to honor him. The portraits of his ancestors glared down like sentinels, each reminding him of the duty he could not escape. From the courtyard below came the faint hum of laughter, servants clearing the remains of the feast, free from the pretense that choked the upper halls. He envied them, their simple joy unburdened by expectation. And somewhere beyond the gates, in the quiet heart of the village, he imagined a bakery still lit by the dying glow of its oven. Perhaps Ilara Whitby was washing her hands after another long day, unaware that her name had already become the whispered secret of a duke. He exhaled, the taste of smoke and longing heavy on his tongue. 50 noble daughters, he murmured to himself. Yet it is one without title who haunts me most. The sound of footsteps approached. Lord Henrik bowed. "The council meets at dawn, my lord. They ask for your list of favoured candidates." Thomas gave a small, humourless smile. "Tell them I shall have my answer, once I recall what it means to be ruled by my own heart." Henrik hesitated, but obeyed. When he was gone, Thomas looked once more to the dark horizon. Somewhere beyond it, the scent of fresh bread still lingered in memory, a quiet rebellion against the grandeur that suffocated him. The night of the royal feast arrived with a chill that clung to the stone walls and whispered through the corridors of Wessex Castle. Torches burned bright against the draught, and music from the great hall spilled into the courtyards. vials and lutes weaving melodies of charm and rivalry. Servants hurried between tables, balancing trays of roasted meats and gilded goblets, while nobles adorned in velvet and pearls moved like peacocks beneath the chandeliers. Thomas Arden sat at the head of the hall, surrounded by laughter that felt foreign to his ears. The 50 noble daughters had transformed the room into a contest of grace and display. Every smile was measured, every glance deliberate. Yet despite their beauty, his gaze kept straying toward the servants' doors where he half expected to see a face dusted in flour rather than painted in rouge. Lady Rosalind of Kent approached with perfect poise, her gown a deep crimson trimmed with gold. "Your Grace," she began, dipping in an elegant curtsy, "you sit so solemn among celebration. Do the daughters of Wessex fail to please you?" Thomas lifted his goblet but did not drink. "Perhaps it is not pleasure I seek tonight, my lady." Her smile curved with practiced charm. "Then what does the Alpha seek? I hear whispers he has a secret, some mystery beyond the council's reach." "Whispers travel fast," he replied evenly, "and most are unworthy of breath." Rosalind leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Secrets rarely stay buried, Your Grace, especially those that smell of bread and warmth." For a fleeting second, Thomas's composure faltered. Her eyes glittered with satisfaction. "Careful, my lady," he said softly. "You may burn your fingers reaching for what is not meant to be touched." She tilted her head, lips curling into a confident smile. "Or perhaps I'm the only one bold enough to reach." Then she glided away, her perfume trailing like smoke. Thomas's patience thinned with the falseness of the evening. The laughter grated, the flattery stung. He longed for the honest silence of the village, the hum of simple work, and the sincerity of unguarded words. But duty chained him to the hall. The musicians struck up a new tune as servants entered with fresh platters. Among them walked Elara Whitby, her hair braided simply beneath a plain kerchief, her hands steady as she carried loaves of golden bread. She had come only to deliver the order promised for the feast, unaware that the Duke himself sat mere steps away. Her heart pounded as she crossed the threshold. The hall glittered like a dream, chandeliers blazing, noble women laughing behind jeweled fans. She kept her eyes low, willing herself invisible. Yet when she reached the high table and laid the bread before the Duke, his gaze caught hers, unyielding and unmistakable. The air between them tightened, a silent recognition neither could disguise. Thomas rose slightly, his chair scraping softly across the floor. The hall quieted. "You baked this?" he asked, his voice carrying over the crowd. Elara hesitated. "Yes, my lord." He nodded slowly, his tone gentler than protocol allowed. "It smells finer than anything gold could buy. Tell your father the Duke is grateful." A murmur rippled through the assembly. Whispers bloomed like wildfire. A nobleman speaking to a peasant, in public no less, was a scandal waiting to burst. Elara bowed quickly, her pulse racing. "Now you honor us, Your Grace," she said quietly, retreating toward the doors. Lady Rosalind's fan snapped shut. "Your Grace," she said smoothly, her voice sweet but edged with venom. "Is our Duke now in the habit of thanking kitchen hands as he would his equals?" Thomas turned toward her, expression unreadable. "Courtesy does not lower a man, my lady." "Only arrogance does." A hush fell and Rosalind's smile stiffened. "Of course, Your Grace, I meant no disrespect." But her eyes, sharp and glinting, betrayed fury. As Thomas resumed his seat, he knew he had crossed a line the council would not ignore. Elara, meanwhile, fled the hall with trembling hands. Behind her, laughter and music resumed, but the moment lingered, a fragile flame defying a storm. She pressed her palm against her chest, where her heartbeat thundered. She did not yet know the danger she had awakened, nor the enemies her mere presence had already earned. And high above, in the candle-lit balconies, Lady Rosalind whispered to a confidant, her voice cold as steel. "The baker's daughter believes herself unseen," she said. "Tomorrow we shall remind her where she belongs." The following morning dawned grey and heavy, the kind of sky that foretold both rain and reckoning. The banners of Wessex drooped under mist as the castle stirred with whispers. In the great hall the council convened for the contest of virtues. a series of trials designed to reveal the worthiest bride among the 50 noble daughters. The nobles called it tradition. Thomas saw it for what it was, theatre disguised as morality. The first challenge was wisdom. One by one, the noblewomen stood before a panel of advisers, answering riddles and moral questions, crafted to test intellect and composure. Thomas sat apart, his face unreadable as he listened to rehearsed answers polished by tutors. Each response was graceful, clever, and utterly hollow. Lady Rosalind spoke last, her voice smooth as silk. "Wisdom," she said, "is knowing when to command and when to be silent. A wife's strength lies in her restraint." The hall murmured in approval. Thomas's jaw tightened. "And yet," he said, his tone quiet but cutting, "is silence always a virtue, or merely a convenience for those who fear truth?" Her lips curved faintly. "Only men with guilty hearts fear silence, Your Grace." The words hung like frost in the air. The council chuckled politely, but Thomas said no more. By midday, the second trial began, compassion. The noblewomen were led to the courtyard, where beggars from the outskirts had been gathered. It was meant to be a show of charity, but the display turned sour quickly. Some women offered coins with gloved hands, careful not to touch the poor. Others turned away altogether, offended by the stench of hunger. Thomas rose from his seat. "Enough," he said, his voice firm. "Compassion does not hide behind silk." The crowd fell silent. He turned to Lord Henrik. "Tell them to dismiss this farce." "But, Your Grace," the steward whispered, "the council insists." "Then let them insist to my face," Thomas interrupted, striding toward the gate. He could not watch another moment of hypocrisy disguised as virtue. Beyond the courtyard walls, the village road wound down to the market. The smell of bread reached him again, faint but distinct, stirring something deep within. He stopped himself before following it. He had duties, and eyes watching his every move. Yet the longing to return to that small, honest warmth gnawed at him more fiercely than the crown itself. Back in the hall, Lady Rosalind stood among her peers, her expression cool and calculating. She had noticed the Duke's growing unease, and it pleased her. "Our Alpha tires of the games," she told a nearby lady, voice low. "Perhaps he fears losing." "Or perhaps," the woman whispered back, "he's found someone who refuses to play." Rosalind's gaze sharpened. "Then she shall learn that refusing the game does not exempt her from its cost." As dusk approached, the third and final trial, loyalty, commenced. Each lady was asked to pledge her vow to the Duke, declaring how she would serve his reign. The words blurred together in a sea of rehearsed devotion. Thomas heard none of them. His mind was elsewhere, in the small bakery, in the scent of flour, in the warmth of laughter that had asked for nothing in return. When the last vow faded, the hall erupted in applause. The council rose, satisfied, and Lord Henrik approached him quietly. "The people await your judgment, my lord. Whom shall we name the leading lady of the trials?" Thomas looked out across the hall, at the jeweled faces, the eyes gleaming with ambition, and then down at his own hands. For the first time, they felt empty. "None," he said simply. Henrik's brow furrowed. "Your Grace?" "None," Thomas repeated louder this time. "Virtue cannot be measured in words or ribbons." "Dismiss the trials." Gasps rippled through the chamber. The councilmen exchanged uneasy glances. Rosalind's smile did not falter, but her eyes burned. "How noble of you, Your Grace," she said sweetly. "To deny judgment is, perhaps, its own kind of pride." Thomas met her gaze, unflinching. "Then let it be pride, but it will be mine, not theirs." He turned and left the hall, the echo of his boots resounding like a challenge. Behind him, whispers rose, suspicion, curiosity, outrage. By nightfall, rumours had already begun to spread through Wessex. The Duke had defied the council. The contest had failed. And somewhere in the kitchens, a servant whispered that the baker's daughter had been summoned to the castle. The corridors of Wessex Castle carried sound like secrets through stone. Even the smallest word could travel from kitchen to council in an hour, reshaped into rumour before nightfall. That day, Whispers fluttered faster than servants' steps, whispers of the baker's daughter summoned to the Duke's service. Ilara Whitby stood near the servants' entrance, her hands clasped tightly before her. The castle loomed above her like a mountain of shadow and marble. She had never stepped beyond its gates before, and the air inside felt too clean, too still, as if even the wind was bound by rank. A guard motioned her forward. "His Grace requested your presence," he said curtly. "You'll report to the kitchens until further orders." She nodded, trying to steady her breath. "I'm here only to work," she murmured, though the words felt hollow even as she said them. In the kitchens, warmth and chaos reigned. Pots clanged, steam hissed, and cooks shouted over each other. Yet amid the bustle, one woman approached her, young, poised, and wearing the badge of a lady-in-waiting. "You're the baker's daughter," the woman said, studying her curiously. "Ilara, isn't it?" "Yes, my lady," Ilara replied softly. The woman smiled faintly. "I'm Lady Beatrice. I heard what you did last night, standing before the Duke like a woman unafraid. Few in this castle dare to meet his eyes." Ilara frowned, unsure how to respond. "I didn't stand before him. I was delivering bread." "Then perhaps it was the bread that carried courage," Beatrice said, her smile deepening. "Be careful, Ilara. In this place, even bread can be dangerous." As the day went on, Ilara worked quietly, but she felt the eyes upon her. Servants whispering behind sleeves, noblemen passing through the halls with half-smiles and curious glances. It wasn't mockery, not yet. It was something more poisonous, fascination. When the dinner bell rang, she was sent to deliver baskets of pastries to the upper corridors. The path wound past tapestries depicting battles long won and kings long dead. Her steps echoed softly against the flagstones, and for a moment she felt the strange weight of history pressing down on her. Turning a corner, she stopped short, for standing ahead, speaking in hushed tones with Lord Henrik, was the Duke himself. Henrik noticed her first and stiffened. "Your Grace," Thomas looked up, surprise flashing across his face before softening into something gentler. "Ilara," he said quietly, "you shouldn't be here alone." Her heart stumbled. "I was told to deliver these to the council chamber, my lord." Henrik cleared his throat. "I will see to it," he offered quickly, stepping forward to take the basket, but Thomas raised a hand. "No." "Let her stay." Henrik hesitated, then bowed slightly. "As you wish, your Grace." He left them with a glance that was both loyal and warning. The corridor fell silent. Only the sound of rain against the distant windows filled the space between them. Thomas studied her, not with the authority of a duke, but with the quiet wonder of a man seeing honesty in a place starved of it. "They say I summoned you," he said, "but truth be told, I only wished to see if rumor could reach you before I did." Ilara shifted uneasily. "Rumor reaches faster than truth, my lord, especially when truth isn't welcome." He smiled faintly. "And yet, you came." "I came because I was ordered." "And stayed because you wanted to?" Her lips parted, but no answer came. She looked away, her pulse hammering in her throat. "You shouldn't speak to me this way, your Grace. People are already watching." "I know," he said softly, "and yet I find I care less with every glance they cast." For a heartbeat, silence bound them again, heavy, fragile, forbidden. Then the sound of footsteps echoed from beyond the archway. Voices, sharp, mocking, unmistakably noble. Ilara stepped back quickly. "I must go." Thomas's expression darkened. "Wait." But she was already retreating, the basket clutched tightly in her hands. She turned down the next corridor, her breath shallow, her thoughts spinning like leaves in a storm. Behind her, the whispers began anew. By nightfall, the story would change a dozen times. That the Duke had cornered her, that she had bewitched him, that something more had passed between them than words. In her small chamber that evening, Ilara stared at her hands. The same hands that had baked, mended, built a life from nothing. "Let them whisper," she said quietly to herself. "If truth offends them, then let it roar." But her courage trembled beneath the weight of what she could not control. Somewhere in the upper halls, the Duke of Wessex stood by a rain-soaked window, knowing that one glance had already set the court against them both. The banquet in honour of the contest's closing was meant to restore dignity to Wessex. Instead, it became the night that fractured its court. Candles blazed across the vaulted hall, gilding the marble floors in gold and shadow. The air carried the perfume of roasted meats and ambition. Laughter rose, but beneath it lingered unease, the kind that trembles before a storm. Ilara Whitby, dressed in a plain gown borrowed from the castle laundress, stood near the servants' table, her heart hammering. She had been ordered to help serve at the Duke's feast, though she suspected it was no simple coincidence. Every step she took, she felt the gaze of nobles prick her skin like thorns. Lady Beatrice brushed her arm gently. "Keep to the edge," she whispered. "Lady Rosalind is watching. She intends mischief tonight." "I'll stay out of sight," Ilara replied, though she doubted she truly could. Her presence alone drew eyes, a peasant girl among jewels. At the high table, Thomas Arden sat with his council. His composure was iron, his posture regal, yet his thoughts wandered. He had spent the past days battling rumour and doubt, enduring the council's warnings, deflecting Rosalind's honeyed provocations. But none of it dulled the memory of that brief, stolen moment in the corridor, of Ilara's defiant calm against a world eager to crush her. "Your Grace," Lord Henrik murmured beside him, "the nobles grow restless. They fear your distractions may delay your choice of bride." Thomas's eyes flicked toward the servants' line where Ilara stood, hands steady, though her knuckles whitened. "Let them fear," he said quietly. "Fear often keeps them honest." Henrik sighed. Honesty is a rare feast in this hall. At the far end, Lady Rosalind rose, goblet in hand. Her gown shimmered like blood under candlelight. "I toast," she declared, voice sweetly commanding, "to His Grace the Alpha of Wessex. May he find the strength to rule his heart as well as his land." The nobles applauded politely, but Rosalind's eyes never left Ilara. Then, with a smile sharp enough to cut glass, she added, "And perhaps to those among us who forget their place, may they remember it before pride devours them." Laughter rippled across the hall. Ilara froze. She understood at once that the words were meant for her. Thomas's expression hardened. "Enough, Lady Rosalind," she turned to him, feigning innocence. "Did I offend, Your Grace? Surely we must protect the order that keeps our kingdom whole. A crown cannot bow to flower and call it virtue." The room fell silent. Ilara's breath caught, her pulse roaring in her ears. She wanted to vanish, but shame and anger rooted her still. Thomas rose, his chair scraping against the floor like a drawn blade. His voice rang through the hall, calm, commanding, dangerous. "If virtue offends you, my lady, perhaps you should seek comfort in your own reflection." A murmur surged among the nobles, half admiration, half alarm. Rosalind's painted smile faltered. "You defend her," she said, her tone trembling between disbelief and fury. "I defend decency," he answered, "even if it has to wear an apron to be seen." Gasps broke like waves. Ilara's face burned. Humiliation and awe tangled within her. Never had anyone spoken so boldly on her behalf, and yet his defense painted her further into scandal. Rosalind bowed stiffly, venom glittering in her eyes. "Then I wish your Grace joy in his charity." Thomas's hand curled into a fist. "Leave the hall." The words cracked through the silence. Even the musicians stopped playing. Rosalind's attendants hurried to her side, guiding her toward the exit, though her glare lingered long enough to promise retribution. When she was gone, the hall buzzed with uneasy whispers. Thomas looked around at the faces, nobles hiding shock behind wine and silk, and then down at Ilara. Their eyes met only for a moment, yet in that glance lay everything neither could safely say. "Continue the feast," he ordered, then turned and strode from the hall. The doors shut behind him with a thunderous echo. Ilara stood frozen, her breath shallow. Beatrice gripped her arm. "You must go back to the quarters now." "I didn't mean for this," Ilara whispered. "I know," Beatrice said softly. "But meaning won't save you from the storm that's coming." That night, As the castle quieted and the last candles guttered out, the story spread through Wessex like wildfire. The Duke had risen for a common girl. Lady Rosalind had sworn vengeance, and by dawn, the council would demand answers that no heart, no matter how noble, could give without consequence. By dawn, the castle of Wessex felt colder than stone. Servants avoided Ilara's gaze, whispering as she passed, their pity as sharp as judgment. Before the sun had cleared the mist, she was summoned to the lower hall, where Lord Henrik waited beside a sealed parchment, and the Duke's absence spoke louder than any decree. "Ilara Whitby," Henrik said, his tone heavy but not cruel, "by order of the council, you are to return to your village at once. His Grace cannot defy the court's decision." She clutched her apron, her voice low. "And what does His Grace say?" Henrik hesitated. "He says nothing, which in this place is the only way to protect you." Her throat tightened. "Then his silence is my sentence." Henrik lowered his gaze. "Do not mistake silence for surrender. There are battles fought in stillness." He handed her the parchment. "Take this. Your family's bakery shall be exempt from the next tithe. It is all he could grant without the council's suspicion." Ilara accepted it with trembling fingers. "Tell him." Her words faltered, her heart aching with what she dared not finish. "No, it doesn't matter. The council will twist even gratitude into scandal." Henrik nodded solemnly. "Then keep your words. Sometimes, love must hide, until the world deserves to hear it." By mid-morning the gates opened and Ilara walked out beneath grey skies and watchful eyes. The road to the village stretched long and silent. Every step felt like an echo of what she was leaving behind. The warmth of his voice, the defiance in his gaze, the impossible tenderness between a duke and a baker's daughter. When she reached the village square, the familiar scent of bread met her like an old friend. Her father looked up from the counter as she entered the bakery. "Ilara!" "God above, what are you doing back so soon?" Her lips curved in a small weary smile. "It seems Wessex has no appetite for humility." He frowned, dusting flour from his hands. "Did they treat you poorly?" "Not poorly," she said, setting the parchment on the table. "Just as they were taught to treat those who forget their place." He unrolled the seal, reading the Duke's signature. "He did this for you?" "For us," she replied softly, "though it may cost him more than either of us can repay." Her father sighed deeply, pride and worry warring in his eyes. "You've always had your mother's stubborn heart. It's a blessing and a curse." Ilara forced a smile. "I suppose I'll learn which soon enough." Days passed. The rhythm of the bakery returned, though the air around her felt heavier. Some villagers admired her for standing near the Duke's light. Others whispered that she had brought danger upon them all. Rumors reached even the children, who watched her with wide, uncertain eyes. At night, when the ovens cooled and the streets emptied, she would sit by the window staring toward the dark hills where Wessex Castle loomed unseen. She told herself she had accepted her fate. Yet each time the wind shifted, carrying the faint toll of distant bells, her heart stirred like embers refusing to die. One evening, as rain pattered against the shutters, her father called from the door. "A messenger came while you were kneading. He left this." He handed her a small bundle wrapped in linen. Inside lay a single loaf of fine bread, unlike any they baked, dense, fragrant, and bound with a strip of crimson silk. Tucked beneath it was a folded letter, sealed with the mark of the silver wolf. Her hands trembled as she broke it open. "Ilara, they have silenced my voice before the council, but they cannot still my heart. Every word I dare not speak echoes here, beneath this seal. The court demands obedience, but my soul demands you. If I must lose my crown to find my freedom, then I will call it a fair exchange. Until that day, bake and breathe, and think of me not as your duke, but as the man who cannot forget the warmth of your hands. T.A." Tears welled in her eyes, falling onto the parchment. She pressed it to her chest, whispering his name into the quiet. The hearth flickered, its flames dancing against the walls like the memory of his gaze. Outside, the rain softened to a hush. The letter lay beside the firelight, a promise sealed in defiance of a kingdom's will. Ilara closed her eyes, and for the first time since her exile, she allowed herself to believe that their story, fragile, forbidden, but unbroken, was not yet over. The letter haunted Ilara long after its ink had dried. She kept it folded beneath the floorboard near her bed, safe from prying eyes but never far from thought. Every night when the village slept, she would take it out and trace his handwriting, bold strokes softened by restraint, the hand of a man used to command yet humbled by longing. Weeks passed. The world around her moved as if nothing had changed, yet everything within her had. Each loaf she baked carried a weight of memory. Each sunrise reminded her that he still lived bound by duty, while she endured freedom that felt like exile. The parchment's words whispered in her mind, "If I must lose my crown to find my freedom, then I will call it a fair exchange." One evening, as she swept the bakery floor, her father approached, his brow furrowed. "You've been quiet again," he said. "Is the work not enough to fill your thoughts?" She forced a smile. "It's not the work that's heavy, father. It's the air." He sighed, rubbing his hands together. "The air is full of gossip, that's what it is. They say the Duke is to be judged by the council for improprieties. They name you in their whispers." Ilara froze. "Judged?" "For what I did. For what they believe you mean," he replied gravely. "When power trembles, the court seeks a scapegoat. It's easier to punish love than pride." Her chest tightened. She had thought the storm had passed, that distance had shielded them both. But now she saw it clearly. Her silence had not protected him, it had only delayed the reckoning. That night she read the letter again by candlelight. The words burned into her as though written with fire. "Every word I dare not speak echoes here." She pressed the parchment to her lips, whispering, "And every word I dare not send answers you." The next morning she sought the village courier, a grizzled man who carried messages between the markets and the garrison. "I need this delivered to the Duke's steward," she said, handing him a sealed note. He raised an eyebrow. "Dangerous words to send upward, miss. Castles bite back." "Then let them," she replied. "Some truths deserve the risk." Days passed in silence. The letter vanished into the world, swallowed by distance and uncertainty. Ilara worked, but her thoughts strayed endlessly to Wessex Castle. Did he read her words? Did they comfort him or curse him further? On the fourth evening, a traveller brought news. The Duke had defied the council once more, refusing to name a noble bride. The court was in uproar. Some called him reckless, others called him brave. And through it all her name, though never spoken aloud, lingered behind every accusation. Ilara's father found her by the fire, staring into the flames. "You cannot change his fate," he said softly. "Men like him are chained to crowns. Love doesn't melt iron." She turned to him, her voice steady, though her eyes burned. "Then let it rust instead. I will not sit here while they tear him apart for what I caused." He frowned, his age showing in the deep lines across his face. "You can't go back there, Ilara. The court won't see a girl in love. They'll see a threat. Let them see what they wish," she said, "but I'll see him one last time." Before dawn, she packed a small satchel, bread, a shawl, the letter he had written, and slipped out of the bakery. The streets were still dark, the world hushed and waiting. She walked until the cobblestones gave way to mud, until the castle rose again in the distance, black against the morning sky. Her heart pounded with every step. Fear shadowed her, but purpose guided her more strongly. She thought of his words, "If I must lose my crown to find my freedom," and whispered to herself, "Then let me lose everything to give it back." The road ahead stretched silent and uncertain, lined with the ghosts of choices she could not undo. Yet as the wind picked up, carrying the faint echo of church bells from Wessex, Ilara lifted her chin. The time for silence was over. The bells of Wessex rang before sunrise, their tolls heavy and unrelenting. The castle walls trembled with anticipation, not for a feast or coronation, but for judgment. Word had spread across the realm. Duke Thomas Arden would stand before the royal council to answer for his defiance. Nobles from distant provinces had gathered, eager to witness the fall of the Alpha, who had dared to challenge the bloodlines. Inside the great hall, the air was thick with perfume and politics. Torches flickered against the stone pillars, casting restless shadows that seemed to whisper accusation. Thomas stood before the council table, his bearing proud though exhaustion dulled the edges of his strength. He had spent the night without sleep, his thoughts haunted by Ilara's face, her voice, the letter he had not answered. Lord Henrik stood nearby, tense and pale. "Your Grace," he murmured, "the King's Justiciar will demand your oath of loyalty. Choose your words carefully. They seek to corner you, not to hear you." Thomas gave a faint, grim smile. "If they wish to trap me with truth, they may find I've no talent for lying." The hall doors opened with a resonant groan. Trumpets sounded and the council filed in, stern men draped in fur and velvet, their eyes gleaming with judgment. At their center sat the king himself, aged but sharp, his gaze cutting through the murmurs like a blade. "Duke of Wessex," the king began, his voice carrying the weight of law, "you have defied the court's order to wed a noble daughter, thus endangering the alliances that secure our borders. You are accused of placing personal affection above duty. How do you answer?" Thomas lifted his head. "With honesty, Your Majesty. I have served the realm faithfully in war and peace. I have obeyed every command but one, the command to silence my heart." A murmur rippled through the chamber. The king's brows drew together. "You speak of the baker's daughter." "I speak of a woman," Thomas said firmly, "whose worth is not measured by lineage. She is not my rebellion, but my redemption." Gasps scattered like sparks. One of the councilmen rose sharply. "You would throw away centuries of noble blood for a commoner's favor." Thomas met his glare. "Blood builds no virtue. It only remembers itself. The crown I wear should serve the people, not cage them." Before the council could respond, the heavy doors swung open once more. The guards moved to block the entrance, but a voice clear and steady broke through the uproar. "Let me pass." The crowd turned as Ilara stepped into the hall. Her gown was simple, travel-stained, her hair damp from the morning mist. Yet the silence that followed her arrival was absolute. Every noble eye fixed upon her with disbelief and disdain. The king rose slightly. "Who dares interrupt a royal hearing?" Ilara bowed deeply. "Ilara Whitby, Your Majesty, daughter of the baker of Mill Street. You have no place here." "With respect, sire," she said, her voice trembling only slightly, "I have every place here, for I am the reason you sit in judgment today." Whispers flared. Thomas's heart clenched. "Ilara," he said quietly, "you should not have come." "I should have come sooner," she replied, turning to face the council. "You accuse him of defiance, but if love is defiance, then the guilt is mine. I did not seek his favor, nor his crown. I sought only to live honestly, and he saw me, not as a servant, but as a soul." The hall erupted. Some shouted heresy, others pity. The king raised his hand for silence. His gaze softened, though his voice remained grave. "Child, your courage is admirable, but courage cannot unmake the law." "Then perhaps the law should remember what it was made for," Ilara said. "To serve justice, not pride." For a long moment no one spoke. Then the king leaned back in his chair, eyes thoughtful. "You speak boldly for one of humble birth. But words alone do not alter order." He turned to Thomas. "If you would have her beside you, Duke, then know the price. Your crown, your lands, your title. You may love freely, but rule no longer." The words fell like thunder. Thomas did not hesitate. "Then I am already free." A stunned silence followed. Ilara stared at him, tears glimmering but unfallen. The king studied them both, the alpha who would surrender his power, and the woman who had made him human. Finally, the monarch exhaled. "So be it. At dawn tomorrow your title shall be forfeit, but your honor will remain, for a man who values love above dominion may yet teach us all the measure of true rule." Thomas bowed his head. "You honor me, Majesty." As the council dispersed in murmurs, Ilara approached him slowly. "You meant what you said?" she whispered. He looked at her with quiet certainty. "Every word. Her crown weighs nothing beside your heart." And as the torches burned low, the Duke of Wessex, no longer Duke, no longer Alpha, took the hand of the baker's daughter, and together they stepped into an uncertain dawn that promised no throne, but something far rarer, freedom shared. The morning sun rose timidly over Wessex, its light casting long shadows across the castle walls, as if it too hesitated to witness what was unfolding. The once grand halls of the fortress felt different now, empty, almost hollow. Gone was the hum of courtly chatter, the rustle of silks and jewels. In their place there was silence, thick with the weight of decisions made. Thomas stood at the edge of the great hall, the Alpha's crown in his hands. It was heavier now, not in gold or jewels, but in the knowledge of what it cost to wear it. This was the final hour of his reign, the last moment he would stand as Duke of Wessex. The council had spoken, the king had decreed, and the crown had been stripped from his brow. Clara entered the hall quietly, her footsteps barely a whisper against the cold stone. She watched him from across the room, her heart in her throat, her chest tight with emotion. The weight of the past days, of all the trials they had faced, the obstacles they had overcome, was now settling on their shoulders like the remnants of a dream fading at dawn. "You don't have to do this," Ilara said softly, though her words were heavy with understanding. Thomas turned to her, his face somber, but not regretful. "I have no choice, Ilara. The crown was never truly mine to keep. It was given to me by birth, but it's not my soul. And now I choose to give it up." Her heart ached at the sight of him standing there, stripped of the title that had defined him for so long. The man before her was not the Duke, not the ruler of Wessex. He was Thomas, a man who had chosen to live, to love, without the chains of duty and expectation that had bound him for so long. "You've lost everything," Ilara whispered, her voice breaking. "Your title, your lands, your people, everything you've known. And I've gained everything I never thought I could have," Thomas replied, stepping closer to her. "I've gained a life with you." He took her hands in his, holding them as though they were the only thing grounding him to this world. For a moment, the weight of the crown faded, and all that remained was the simplicity of their connection. There was no title, no wealth, no courtly expectations. There was only them, standing together in a world that had, for too long, been ruled by pride and tradition. "You won't have to do it alone," Ilara said, her voice firm with conviction. "We'll build something new. Together." Thomas smiled, the first true smile in days, and he leaned down to kiss her forehead. "I'll have you, Ilara. That is more than enough." Outside, the courtyard was silent, save for the distant calls of birds and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. The people of Wessex had gathered in the square below, awaiting the Duke's final proclamation. They had come to witness the fall of a ruler, the end of an era, but Thomas knew that this moment would be remembered for something more. He had chosen love over power, humility over dominance, and as he stepped out onto the balcony, the crown still heavy in his hands, the murmurs of the crowd died down. The people who had once admired him for his strength now waited for his words, for his final declaration as Duke of Wessex. He lifted the crown high, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "The crown is not mine to wear," Thomas said. "I give it to the people of Wessex, for it was never meant to be a symbol of power, but a reminder of service. The Alpha may lead, but a true leader serves those they love. Today I leave behind the title of Duke, for my heart belongs elsewhere, with the people, with Ilara." The crowd was silent for a moment, the weight of his words settling over them like a slow tide. And then from the back a voice rose, soft at first, then growing louder. A cheer. A cry of acceptance, of respect for the man who had chosen love over the throne. Ilara's heart swelled as the people of Wessex, who had once seen Thomas as a symbol of power, now embraced him for his courage, for his willingness to put aside everything he had known to follow his heart. Thomas turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and hope. "We are free now, Ilara," he said. "We can live without the chains of expectation, without the burden of titles." And for the first time, the weight that had settled on their shoulders seemed lighter, as if the world itself had shifted, not because of the crown he had given up, but because of the life they were about to build together. Winter had come to Wessex, a blanket of snow covering the land, turning the once bustling castle into a quiet, still monument to a time now gone. The fire in the hearth crackled, but the air within the castle felt colder than it should have. Thomas and Ilara stood at the edge of a new life, one that was uncertain, without the titles and luxuries they had once known. There was no crown, no castle to command, no wealth to shield them. They were starting over, but together. It wasn't the life either of them had expected, but it was the one they had chosen. "Do you think we can do it?" Ilara asked softly, her breath fogging in the cold air. Her eyes flicked toward the distant fields where the workers were already preparing for the coming season. Build something real, from nothing. Thomas stood beside her, his eyes focused on the horizon. His shoulders were no longer weighed down by the responsibilities of a duke, but by a new kind of pressure, the pressure of proving themselves, not just to the kingdom, but to themselves. "We've already started, haven't we?" he said, his voice steady but laced with uncertainty. "The land doesn't care about titles. It cares about those who work it, those who respect it." The village had been kind to them, but kindness, Ilara knew, could only go so far when winter's grip tightened. She watched the villagers go about their work, their breath steaming in the air, and she wondered what they thought of the former duke and his new life as a common man. There had been whispers, some warm and welcoming, others laced with doubt. "The first test is coming," Thomas continued, his gaze shifting from the workers to her. "I can't expect them to believe in us right away, but we have no choice but to try." "Together," Ilara said, her voice filled with resolve. "We do it together." And so they did. Days stretched into weeks as the harsh winter wore on. The land was unforgiving, and the work was harder than anything either of them had ever known. No more courtly feasts, no more soft silks and heavy silences. Now there were blisters from ploughing the fields, frostbitten fingers from working through the cold, and the never-ending worry about whether the harvest would be enough to see them through. But there was something else and something new that began to grow between them. It wasn't just a shared burden, though, that was part of it. It was the feeling of building something real, of forging their own future. With every day, they learned more about each other, not as Duke and Baker's daughter, but as two people who had chosen each other above all else. One evening, as the wind howled outside the walls of their small cottage, Ilara found Thomas sitting by the fire, his eyes distant, as if lost in thought. She joined him, sitting quietly beside him for a moment, letting the warmth from the flames wash over her. "You're thinking about the past again," she said, her voice soft. Thomas didn't look at her immediately, his hands resting on his knees. "I'm thinking about what's ahead. We've made it this far, Ilara, but the winter, it's only getting worse. What if we fail?" His words hung in the air, raw with the vulnerability he had never shown before. Ilara reached out, placing a hand over his. "We can't think like that. We've already proven more than anyone ever expected." She squeezed his hand gently. "You proved it the moment you walked away from that crown." A long silence followed, and for a moment they both simply watched the fire crackle and dance in the hearth. "What's next?" she asked, the question almost a whisper. Thomas finally turned to her, his face softening. "Next, we see what we're made of. If we can survive the winter, we'll know we can survive anything. And after that, we build. Not a kingdom, but something worth more than all the gold or titles in the world." Ilara smiled, her heart swelling with a pride she hadn't known she could feel. This was the man she had always known he could be. Not the Duke, not the Alpha, but a man willing to face the unknown with her side by side. "Then we'll build," she said firmly, her eyes shining with resolve. "Together." And so they did. The winter proved to be harsh, but it also proved something else, that the bond between them was stronger than any title, any wealth, any crown. They weathered the storm not just as survivors, but as partners in the truest sense of the word. No longer ruled by fate, they chose each other again and again, and with each passing day, their future grew brighter. The path ahead was still uncertain, but it no longer seemed as terrifying. They had each other, and that was enough. Spring arrived late in Wessex, as if it too had hesitated to witness the change that had taken place. The thaw had begun, and the snow on the hills now whispered of new beginnings, but the earth beneath remained stubbornly cold. The village of Wessex, where Thomas and Elara had built their life from the remnants of a forgotten world, still carried the scars of winter, but with it, the hope of something reborn. For weeks, the two of them worked the land, hand in hand, waking early and resting late, their bodies exhausted but their spirits unwavering. Each morning, the sun broke through the fog like a promise, a symbol that despite all that had been lost, something new was taking root. Yet, despite their efforts to remain grounded in the simplicity of their new life, the world beyond their small cottage had not forgotten them. Rumors of the Duke's abdication had travelled faster than wildfire, and news of his fall from grace had reached the ears of Wessex's nobility. The whispers were now louder, sharper, their accusations still echoing in the grand halls of the capital. One such morning, as Elara tended to the fire in their humble hearth, Thomas stood at the window, watching the horizon. His face was etched with the quiet contemplation of a man who had turned his back on everything he had once known. Yet even in his solitude, there was no regret in his heart. There was only the unyielding pull of the future, and the woman beside him who had given him a reason to walk toward it. "Elara," he said softly, breaking the silence, "we cannot escape it forever." She turned to him, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "Wessex. It will come for us eventually. The council, the king, even the people." His voice grew distant, his gaze never leaving the distant hills. "They will ask us to return. They will demand that I reclaim what I gave up." Elara approached him slowly, her hand resting on his shoulder. "Then we'll face it together. You've given them everything they wanted, Thomas. But you've also given them something they can't take back. Your choice. Our choice." He smiled, but it was bittersweet. "I've chosen love. And that is all I need." But deep inside, the truth lingered, the truth that their new life, as simple and fulfilling as it was, would never fully escape the shadow of the past. No matter how far they travelled, how much they built, the kingdom would always be calling him back. Later that week, a letter arrived from the capital. It was not unexpected. The royal seal was unmistakable, and as Thomas read it, the weight of his decision pressed against him once more. The king, in his own way, had extended an invitation. Wessex would honour his abdication, but there was an offer, a seat at the council table, a chance to serve in a new role. The title of Duke had been forfeited, but his wisdom was still valued. It was a chance to rebuild, to return to the court he had left behind with Elara by his side. But it came with a price. His life, their life, would no longer be their own. He would once again be a part of a machine that ran on power and manipulation. Elara saw the letter before Thomas could hide it. "What does it say?" she asked, her voice guarded but curious. He handed it to her wordlessly, watching her eyes scan the page. When she finished reading, she folded the letter with a deliberate slowness, her hands steady. "I see." Thomas sighed, rubbing his hand across his face. "I don't know if I can go back to that life, Elara. I don't know if I can be part of a system that takes everything from those it claims to protect. And you won't have to," she said firmly, stepping closer. "This is your choice. We've already built something here. Something real. You're not obligated to return, Thomas. We don't need that world to be happy." He met her gaze, and in that moment, something shifted inside him. For so long he had carried the weight of the crown, the title, the expectations. But here, in the quiet of their small life, he felt something he hadn't in years. Peace. "No," Thomas said, the decision final, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "I won't go back." Elara smiled, a quiet relief washing over her. "Then we continue." Together. The morning air was still cool, but the promise of spring was undeniable. The land was alive again, and so were they. Their future, uncertain as it was theirs to shape. And for the first time in a long while, Thomas felt the weight of the world lift from his shoulders. There was no crown, no title, no kingdom to return to. There was only Elara, and the life they would build together. And so, as the sun rose higher, they turned away from the past and walked toward the future, one step at a time, hand in hand. The days following Thomas's decision were quieter than he had expected. The winds of Wessex shifted, carrying with them a sense of finality that both relieved and unsettled him. The world, it seemed, was moving on without him. The court was no longer his concern, and yet the echoes of his abdication reverberated far beyond the walls of their small cottage. Still, with every passing day, the weight of the past seemed to lessen, and the future grew clearer. The first true sign of their new life came in the form of a humble gathering at the village square. The harvest had been bountiful despite the harsh winter, and the villagers had come together to celebrate their survival. It wasn't the grandeur of the court, nor the glitter of royal balls, but there was a warmth in the air, a sense of community that filled Thomas with a sense of pride he had never known in his former life. Ilara, standing beside him, smiled up at him, her face illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns. "It's not much, is it?" she said, her voice laced with both affection and the weight of the years that had brought them here. "No," Thomas replied, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "But it's everything." The people of Wessex had accepted them, not as nobility, not as a duke and a commoner, but as two souls who had chosen each other in a world that had once tried to tear them apart. The coronation of the heart, Thomas thought, was not found in the formality of titles or the opulence of crowns. It was in the quiet moments, the everyday acts of love and respect that bound them all together. As they walked through the village, the sound of children's laughter filled the air, and Ilara's hand in his felt like a promise. He had walked away from the life he was born into, and in doing so he had found something far more valuable, a life that belonged to him, to her, to them. Later that evening, as they sat together by the fire, Ilara leaned against his chest, her eyes closing in contentment. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Miss what?" Thomas replied, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "The life you had," she clarified, her hand resting over his heart. "The title, the power, everything that came with it." He thought for a moment, his fingers gently tracing the outline of her hand. "I thought I would. I thought I'd miss the control, the influence, but now I don't. Not when I have this." His hand covered hers, pressing it over his heart. "Not when I have you." Ilara smiled softly, her heart swelling with emotion. "And this is enough for you?" He nodded, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "This is more than enough. This is everything I never knew I needed." The fire crackled between them, and for a moment, all the uncertainty of the past, the doubts, the sacrifices, the risks, faded into the background. Here in this small cottage, surrounded by the quiet of the night, they were exactly where they were meant to be. No title, no crown, no courtly expectations to define them. Only love, only truth. As the flames flickered low, Ilara sat up, her gaze meeting his. "Then we'll build it," she said firmly, the words resolute in her voice. "We'll build a future, a life. From this moment on, we choose it." Together. Thomas looked at her, the woman who had helped him rediscover the meaning of true freedom, and his heart swelled with an emotion so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him. He had once thought that power was the measure of a man. Now he knew better. "Yes," he agreed, his voice full of certainty. Together. The world outside was still dark, but inside their hearts were alight with the promise of a future they would carve for themselves, one step at a time. The throne of Wessex was a memory, a distant echo of a life that no longer held any claim over him. Here by the fire, with Ilara at his side, he had everything he had ever truly wanted. The coronation of the heart had not required a crown or a kingdom. It had only required the courage to love and to choose, not power, not pride, but each other. And with that, they were richer than they had ever been. Years passed, each one settling into the next like the steady rhythm of a heartbeat. Wessex had become a distant memory for Thomas and Ilara, a life once lived, but now fading in the rear view of their journey. Their cottage, nestled at the edge of the village, had grown into a home, not grand or imposing, but rich with warmth and laughter. Here, amidst the ordinary, they had built a life more meaningful than any title or crown could ever offer. The seasons had come and gone, each one weaving its way through the fabric of their days. The winter was no longer a threat, but a time of quiet reflection, while the spring brought the promise of new beginnings. In the fields, they worked side by side, planting, harvesting, and growing, not just food, but a future they could hold in their hands. No council, no court, no rival family to challenge them. Only the earth beneath their feet and the love that flourished between them. Ilara often watched Thomas as he worked the land, his hands rough from years of hard labor, his brow furrowed in concentration. He had shed the weight of nobility, and with it, a part of the man he used to be. But in his place, a new Thomas had emerged, one who found peace in the simplicity of their life, in the quiet moments shared over meals, in the steady rhythm of their days. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, Ilara sat beside him on the porch of their cottage. The warmth of the day still lingered in the air, though the night was creeping in, bringing with it the cool breath of autumn. "You know," Ilara said, breaking the comfortable silence between them, "I never thought we'd end up here. Not like this. I always thought you'd return to Wessex, that you'd go back to the court, to the crown." Thomas smiled, a soft, wistful expression on his face. "I thought I would too," he admitted, "but there was never peace there. Not the kind that matters here with you." He glanced at her, his eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "This is where I'm meant to be. This is the life I never knew I needed." Her heart swelled in her chest at his words. She had watched him grow from a man shackled by duty to one who now lived freely, not because of his absence from Wessex, but because of his choice to be present with her. It wasn't the grand gestures of the noble court that had defined him. It was his willingness to sacrifice it all for the quiet peace of their shared existence. "We've built something here," she said softly, her voice filled with the depth of everything they had worked for. "Something worth more than all the gold and titles in the world." He nodded, his hand reaching for hers. "We've built a life that matters, a life that's ours. No one can take that from us." The wind stirred the trees around them, a gentle reminder of the seasons that had passed and those yet to come. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, the only sound the distant call of birds settling for the night. In the stillness, Thomas leaned over and kissed her gently, a promise made without words. And as the stars began to appear in the sky above, they sat together in the quiet of the evening, knowing that their future was theirs to shape, not dictated by a crown or a title, but by the love they had cultivated from the ground up. They had not returned to Wessex. Instead, they had found something far greater, freedom. In each other, in the life they had chosen, they had found their true home. The dawn beyond the crown was not a distant horizon, but a living, breathing reality they had forged with their own hands. And in that new day, they found everything they had ever needed: